What's the most messed up thing you've seen someone do at work and still not get fired? I worked with a guy who literally had no job. He was the studio supervisor, but there was no activity in the studio to supervise because the studio had effectively become non-operational. He coasted for a full 8 years at this job. He would come in the morning, open his email, get coffee, gossip and complain about the industry for an hour, leave for an hour, come back for lunch, leave for another 3 hours, come back, send a few emails, and then officially leave for the day. It was infuriating and majestic. Yeah, this is what happens when a company gets too big and they can't actually keep track of who is actually working there, and they don't notice that a full salary is just going away for no reason. A store manager got caught adding hours he didn't work to his time card. He got a reprimand and they removed the ability for managers to edit their own hours. About a month later, he gets caught using another manager's login to add more hours he didn't work. Another slap on the wrist and is still working at the same place. Oh man, what kind of dirt does this person have to have on the company to not get fired for something like that? Used his corporate credit card for over $10,000 in personal purchases. He was reprimanded, but not fired or made to pay the company back. Within the next year, he did the exact same thing, and only then was he fired. Hey, I guess this just means that any job you work, you get at least $20,000 to cash out before you have to go. I wouldn't say messed up, but I work closely with the federal government, and the number of people just hanging around until retirement, doing jobs that have been obsolete for 20 years, is remarkable. There's a dude I know whose only job is to scan things, like scan paper into PDFs. He's a federal employee being paid $50,000 a year. Your tax dollars going to good use. I mean, how long is it going to take before everyone just collectively stops paying federal income taxes? I mean, there is no way that anyone can convince me right now that we are not getting ripped off for it. I worked at a school for kids who need emotional support. We had a classroom aide who would come scream at kids until they cried, and then actively mock them for crying. These kids were 7 and came from horrifically abusive houses. It sucked to work in a place that allows abusive behavior to continue. She was close family friends with the principal. It's very hard to help a child when they learn from a young age that adults aren't able to make things better, and adults are capable of incredibly mean things. I mean, how do they even get into jobs like this? It's like, oh, this is the school for kids who need emotional support. I thought it was kids who needed emotional abuse. He liked throwing ice cubes into the deep fryer. He'd stand far enough away that he wouldn't get splashed, which made it a complete surprise to the person working the fryer. If you've never done this, it kinda causes a mini explosion of bubbles and molten grease, which splashes everywhere, and at the very least, makes a mess. When this got too boring, he started stealing kids' meals toys and chucking them into the fryer. It took longer for them to start melting, and if he couldn't get them out, we had to turn the thing off for the rest of the day, because it takes hours for it to cool off long enough to retrieve something, and then at least another hour to heat back up. I can't remember what it was that he threw, but it caught on fire, and he ended up pulling it out with a pair of metal tongs and threw it in the sink. Then he turned on the water and made a bigger fire. Did he get burned? Yes. Did he get fired? No. Did he do it again? Sort of. I think he went back to ice cubes after that. And who says fast food jobs can't be fun? A guy I worked with ran a food truck into an airplane. Then they drug tested him and he peed super dirty. After being told that he'd be getting random drug tests for a while, they showed up at his house within a week. Told them he couldn't because he had just smoked yesterday. He was still employed when I transferred from that airport. Bonus story, one day that same guy crapped his pants at work and sat in the break room until the smell became pretty loud. Someone told him he should go home. His response was, "Nah, dog, the damage is already done." Oh boy, I love how they're just like, "Hey, we need to give you a drug test." And he's just like, "No, I can't, I'm gonna fail, come back another day." And they're like, okay, I guess. Isn't that the whole point of the drug test? I worked in a pizza restaurant when I was 16. The place was absolute anarchy, impossible to get fired. I'd smoke weed with my bosses. They'd joke with me like, "Try not to get too high today." I'll while on the clock. Supervisor would take an hour or more on his 30-minute breaks and come back blasted. We'd all make ourselves free food whenever we wanted. No one was properly trained, so obviously proper procedures were out the window. No one would claim their tips, so we were being sued by the IRS. Again, no one followed procedure, so the health department was on our butt. Yikes. Yeah, businesses like this do not stick around for very long, I don't think. Destroy an overpass with an excavator, improperly loaded on a trailer. Well, that overpass probably just needs to be more reinforced. You guys ever heard of the 11'8" bridge or whatever it's called? Where there's just a bridge that's so low that like big trucks are constantly just ramming right into it and just destroying themselves every single time. It's pretty fun, you should look it up if you haven't seen it. A guy got caught on video backing up into a BMW at a dealership. Got out and looked at it and just left. Still works here, I don't know how. He must have a video of the boss blowing another dude or something. Well, as the guy in that other story said, the damage is already done. Called a customer stupid for leaving his phone behind, and refused to let him back in the theater so he could find it. The phone ended up getting stolen by one of the overnight cleaners, and after a few days was brought back and the customer finally got his phone back. I mean, it's kind of just amazing that he got it back at the end. At a previous job, we had an employee that was called in to clean on an as-needed basis. The employee, who we'll call Fred, owed a lot of child support. After an unusual long break of not working, we called Fred in to clean the workplace. I think he expected to be paid under the table, because when he was given a paycheck, it was near zero because of all the back-due child support he owed that we were forced to take from his paycheck. He literally started screaming, swearing, calling the boss every name you can think of, punching the walls and threatening to shoot up the place. The boss still calls him back to work as needed to clean because he is really good at cleaning. I don't know who needs to hear this, but it's not hard to find somebody who can clean a place. It's not that difficult of a job. Sleep for 3 hours. I was brand new on the job, for corporate thing, and my new coworker came up to me on a weekend shift and said, "I was up really late last night. I'm gonna go lay down for a few minutes." 3 hours later, he woke up and came out to work again, without any measure of apology. In the interim, one of the people we worked for found him asleep and told my boss. He got a warning. Close second being a coworker that hacked the company's network, using the term somewhat loosely, to get an internet access password we weren't allowed to have. Would have gotten away with it if he hadn't also changed their file structure to a folder names like, "F you, I want internet access." He also got a warning. Man, speaking of that falling asleep at work thing, when I first started working graveyards doing the security thing, eventually at one point when I was working by myself, I would just turn the volume up really loud on my computer so that if an alarm came in, it could wake me up. Not mine, but something an old buddy of mine did 15 years ago. He worked for a really big gaming company that was just about to ship a major title. Like, major. Because of beta testing, there was a code in the game that would disable the beta copies the day after the game officially dropped. His job was to make sure the code was removed before they burned all the official CDs for the game's release. Guess who forgot to remove the code? The company had already burned tens of thousands, maybe more, of game discs and boxed them up for shipment before my buddy realized his mistake and came clean to his boss. They had to reburn, replace, and rebox every copy of the game, and do it in time to meet their launch date. Cost a lot of people a lot of extra time and grief, but ultimately my buddy got to keep his job. So wait, I don't actually know what's going on in this one. So if he didn't go through with all of that, then the beta copies would have continued to work? Like, is that the biggest deal in the world? I don't know. If someone wants to explain that one, let me know. I worked at a web hosting tech support company, and a coworker accidentally deleted another customer's website. This was on a Unix system, so it wasn't possible to undo the delete. He deleted the command history to cover his mistake, and then told the customer that the website was lost due to hard drive failure. The customer hadn't been keeping backups and said that he lost his entire livelihood. The employee told management about the situation, and they ran with it to avoid getting sued. They told the customer that hardware issues sometimes happen, and because he hadn't opted into our managed backup services, the data loss was on him. They offered the customer several months of free web hosting as compensation, and the problem went away. A week after seeing this play out, I put in my 2 weeks notice. I feel like you should just be giving that guy free service for life after that. Whilst working at a local hospital, a nursing student snorted a line of whatever, in scrubs, in a hospital bathroom, to post on Snapchat. Or the two housekeepers who engaged in a fistfight on an elevator, only to continue said fistfight as they arrived at their destination. Oh, that kind of sounds like those choreographed movie sword fights where they just have to keep traveling and keep fighting the whole time. Finally, one I can answer. Our department went for a team-building overnight stay abroad. The next day, when we were supposed to meet at the airport, he was nowhere to be found. His phone was off, bosses rang the hospitals, missing persons report, you name it. A week later, the bosses went back to the country to find him again. Nothing. Wife and child hadn't heard anything. A week later, he turns up for work like nothing happened. He had decided to jump on an earlier flight to Thailand for a week's holiday without telling a soul. A couple of meetings with the bosses, never mentioned again. I guess his wife made him feel it, but that was never disclosed. See, being able to just disappear for a week is a luxury that somebody like me kind of has, where you don't have too many obligations and you're single, but that kind of freedom turns off once you start a family and a real job. I work in the office of a major retailer. I have a coworker who's made several negligent blunders that have costed the company millions in lost sales. He has regularly failed to monitor the flow of advertised goods until it's too late to react. Lost sales. He once decided that if someone he works with messes up, it isn't his problem to fix. He wouldn't even tell them about it so they could fix it. Of course, it quite literally is his problem to fix it. This caused lots of failed shipments and flows that, again, caused lost sales. He failed to monitor inventory levels on regular stock items. Sales obviously spiked during Christmas time, which has caused him to run out on half of his inventory and thus lose sales. As of yet, he still hasn't fully normalized all of it. To my knowledge, he's only recently got a formal reprimand for the last one. How it took so long is beyond me. Man, with a lot of these stories, it almost makes you wonder how anybody can have a hard time holding a job. I had a girl steal money from other crew's bags in the locker and changing room. Instead of firing her, they just took the door off the room and put in a camera. So now we have to show up to work in uniform with a shirt over it. It's very hot here, and I end up sweaty by the time I get to work. She also called in one time saying her sister died and needs time off. She never had a sister. After all this, she got rehired after she quit for another job that didn't end up working out. You know, this is kind of like those people with very low self-esteem that they're dating someone who's really abusive, and then that abusive person leaves, but then they still end up taking that abusive person back. I think companies can do the same thing when they just keep rehiring people like this. Wisconsin, pretty nice hotel, our room service chef. I get in for the night, and my coworker is fielding for a call of a very loud guest. I can tell it's going to be bad. Very bad. He hangs up, looks down in sadness for a bit, gets up and slowly walks to the kitchen. His next words were burned into my head. "Hey, can I see your hand?" The cook looks down and notices his band-aid is missing, and made its way into a pizza that went up to a customer. He said his wife had it in her mouth. No, not fired. Okay, well, I mean, it was a simple mistake. I mean, it's disgusting, but, it probably won't happen again. Well, that's all the stories from this pretty wild thread. I swear, like, all the jobs that I've had were either just like, you could do anything and they would just do whatever it took to not fire somebody, or they were jobs that would fire you the second you made one mistake. But anyway, I hope you guys are having a nice new year. We're already 3 days into it. It's moving pretty quick. But as for right now, I'm probably just going to be uploading a little bit less.